back again, this time to wrap up Book Trek 2024. So I had a very sad, unsatisfying Book Trek this year, and I actually didn't read that many books. Last year, I believe I read about 15, 18 books, somewhere in there. I can't remember. I have to go back and count. I just didn't do videos about them. But this year, I only read 7, and I started an 8th, but then I ended up not finishing it. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go from the books I liked best to the books I liked least. The first book that I'll talk about here is Making It So by Patrick Stewart, which is a memoir that I pre-ordered and had been looking forward to for I don't know how many months. I couldn't wait to dive into this, and I was not disappointed at all. I did about half of this on an audiobook. They had it on Everend, so I thought, why not? And he's narrating it himself, which made it like really, really good. So something that I really, really liked about this is he did not talk about his Star Trek years until the very end of the book. I think maybe the last 40 pages were where he was covering his Star Trek experience, but everything before that was all about his life, growing up, the experiences he had, what led him into acting, how he got started, all of that stuff. He talks about his years on the stage. He talks about changing the kind of English accent he had. He had a particular accent that was considered like lower class, and so he changed his accent to be more acceptable and more appealing on stage. I thought that was really interesting. He had married a couple times and cheated on his wives. So I thought that was interesting. And he had an affair with that actress who played Vosh in the TNG. I had no idea. So that was all like super interesting to me. I won't spoil anything else in the book for you. But yeah, it was really good. I really, really enjoyed this. And if you're an audiobook person, you really ought to listen to at least part of it in the audiobook, because of course Patrick Stewart does a marvelous job narrating his own book that really helped make the book come to life for me. So yeah, highly recommend. I gave it 5 stars. Another book that I read and really, really enjoyed was Pliable Truths by Dayton Ward. This is a Star Trek book that came out this year and was about well, let me start by saying this takes place on Deep Space Nine, but before the series starts. So the Cardassians have left, but Sisko has not yet arrived on the station. That's the time period of Deep Space Nine we're looking at here. And Captain Picard has been sent to Deep Space Nine to help facilitate the smooth running of Deep Space Nine, to sort of pave the way for Sisko. However, some situations happen on the station, and Picard is thrown a curveball because he has to delegate these negotiations, and the Cardassian government sends the guy who tortured him in TNG. What was the name of that episode? It was a 2-part episode where Captain Picard is tortured by a Cardassian. I cannot for the life of me remember the name of that episode. I'll put it on the screen here if I don't think of it. But anyway, so that Cardassian shows up for the negotiations. And of course that throws Picard a curveball. And I really liked this book. I liked this a lot. I thought this was really well done. I was really satisfied with the ending. I would definitely recommend this. Another book I read was The Face of the Unknown by Christopher L. Bennett. I liked this book a lot too. I did have a complaint about it, but overall I thought it was really good. So this is a TOS novel, and it is an extension of the Corbomite Maneuver, which is an episode, I think, was it in season 2? I think it was in season 2. But anyways, in this, Kirk and crew end up finding, well, they were kind of left breadcrumbs to discover Balok's homeworld. And it is a very interesting homeworld. I very much enjoyed the way that this author has set up and described this homeworld, the layout of it, the way it operates. I thought it was really good. I'm not going to say what it was, because if you haven't read the book, I don't want to spoil it for you, but that was fantastic. And so a situation happens where they come under some danger that Kirk helps to deal with, and they don't necessarily want his help. So yeah, I thought the story was really good, but my one complaint was that Captain Kirk is objectifying this one female character that he deals with a lot in the book. And there's just something about it that seemed so much worse to me than the really old Star Trek books, where, of course, sexism is rampant, running rampant, you know. But it's just the fact that as the reader, you're reading that inner dialogue while he's objectifying her body numerous times, feels creepy to me. And it feels like a problem the author has. I don't know, it just didn't belong in there, and it was really, really unnecessary. So, but I was able to overlook it. The rest of the book is great. Another book I read was Hearts and Minds by Dayton Ward. Don't remember what this was about. I remember something about relocating some aliens to a new planet or something. I can't remember. But I remember thinking it was okay, that it wasn't great, but it was okay. It was mediocre. But yeah, I don't remember at all. I don't remember what this is about. Sorry. Okay, another book I read was Shadows Have Offended by Cassandra Rose Clark. I did like this book. In this book, you find Captain Picard on Betazoid, who he's participating in some kind of a cultural festival or a cultural ceremony that is really, really important to the Beta-Z people, and is very integrated into their way of life. And there are some artifacts there that are practically spiritual in nature as far as the Beta-Zs are concerned, and they are stolen during this ceremony. So Picard is stuck on the planet having to help deal with that situation. And Worf is in command of the Enterprise, and he and Dr. Crusher and Deanna Troi go off to try to find the artifacts and the thief. And at the end of the book, when they find the thief, I was thrilled. I loved the ending of this book. The book overall is mediocre. It is not super fantastic, but I liked it. Another book I read was Captain's Oath by Christopher L. Bennett. Again, I cannot remember what this is about. Here's what I do remember. I remember that you're following two timelines. You're following Captain Kirk with his first command, the first ship he's in command of. The name of it escapes me. I remember it sounds like Sacagawea, but it's not Sacagawea. It's something else. So you're following him in that timeline, but then you're also following him in the current timeline. And something happened in his first command that was relating to his command of the Enterprise. Don't remember what it was, but I do remember there was a character who was, I believe, an engineer who was injured under his command that he had some guilt about. They were really close friends. And I had a hard time keeping track of which timeline I was in. I remember that. But the thing I remember most about this is that, again, this is Christopher L. Bennett. This is the same author from The Face of the Unknown. But the objectification of women was way worse in this book. And it was worse because there is a situation where Captain Kirk and one of his crewmen find these women who have been held as sex slaves. They're not in good condition. And his crewmate starts making sexually motivated comments about how hot they are. He doesn't use the word how hot, of course, but they have a lot of sexual connotations. And they've been kept as sex slaves. They're in poor condition. They're not doing well. And these are the things that he's thinking. And Captain Kirk gives him a dressing down over it, but he won't shut up. He keeps going on about it. He goes on about it like 3 or 4 times, and Captain Kirk is shut up, you know. But then in his own mind, he's thinking it too. He's thinking it in his mind too. And I'm like, I don't know what's wrong with this author. He writes good stories, but that objectification thing is an issue. It was just especially creepy with this Christopher L. Bennett. So yeah, this book is probably one of the worst Star Trek books I have ever read. And not just because of that, also just because I didn't think much of the story, and I now don't even remember what the story was. Oh, there was one more thing too. I almost forgot. So the rhetoric in this book is insane. Like every other page, Captain Kirk is carrying on about some philosophical point, some spiritual point, worldly advice. I mean, it's just this book, every other page. I mean, the rhetoric is enough to make you insane. And I was super annoyed by the time I got to the end of this book because of that. Another book I read was Collateral Damage by David Mack. There was one thing I liked about it, hated everything else. So in this book, Captain Picard is being brought up on charges because of this conspiracy that happened through Section 31, where the president was killed because he was an evildoer. And now Captain Picard is being swept up in this whole thing, and he's facing a trial. And Captain Picard did a lot of things that were out of character throughout this entire book. I didn't like the way Captain Picard was portrayed. I didn't like the way Beverly Crusher was portrayed, not that she was in it that much. Okay, so the prosecuting attorney in this book is that Philippa, whatever her last name is, I can't remember, from season 1, The Measure of a Man in TNG. That same JAG officer is the prosecuting attorney in this book. And they did a terrible, terrible thing with her character. So at the end of that episode, Picard and Philippa, they make amends and they sort of part as friends and all is forgiven, right? But in this, she is carrying some serious hate towards Picard. She's so hateful and she's deliberately doing everything she can to go after him and bring him down. And I did not agree with that portrayal. I just kept thinking, well, that's not the idea that we got from that character in the episode. So I was annoyed at that. And like I said, Captain Picard wasn't even acting like Captain Picard in this book. And I don't like any of the Section 31 stuff. I hate all of that. And so, of course, I hated it in this book too. And then there was one thing that I did like, and that is that they bring Okana into this book. He's in this book, and he's in this book a lot. He's like one of the main people. And Worf is in command of the Enterprise, and he's dealing with some sabotage that has happened on the ship and everything. And he comes into contact with Okana. And I loved all the Okana stuff. I didn't necessarily like where they took his character, but I did like seeing him, and I did like the personality he had in it. And then the other thing I didn't like about this book is, so all the parts with Okana were in first person, but in all the rest of the book, it was in third person. And that really interfered with the flow of the book. I like both narrative perspectives, but it was weird to keep going back and forth between those two styles of narration. So yeah, this book was a stinker. It was a real stinker. I gave it like 2 stars. The only reason I didn't give it 1 star is because of Okana being in it. And then the last book I could talk about is Kahless by Michael Jan Frieden. I love Michael Jan Frieden. I love him as a Star Trek author. And I really wanted to read Kahless this year. And I started, as you can see, I didn't get very far. Loved what I read, but I had to put it down. I lost my Star Trek momentum in June. June wasn't a good month. And also I had just read a couple of books, Star Trek books that I didn't like. And that also kind of put me out of the mood for Star Trek. I did try to recover my Star Trek mood. My Book Trek co-hosts were recommending A Strange from the Sky and Prime Directive. But, you know, I couldn't get into either one of them. I just couldn't do Star Trek anymore. So that is all the Star Trek I read this year, unfortunately. So yeah, I guess that's everything that I have to say about that. So I'll call it the end of the video.